session that we're having right now, it's on the impact of the triple crisis on SMEs, and we are focused on traders and processors. We will have a presentation, and then from the presentation we have very great knowledgeable team of panelists who will input into the findings that we are going to look at. So I warmly welcome you to the session, and allow me to welcome Vanessa from Agra to give us a present welcome on behalf of Agra. Vanessa, the floor is yours.
Seems odd to stand behind a podium. Welcome, thank you for joining us. This is really going to be a fantastic, probably the most exciting presentation of all week. So I hope we get to know everybody in the room. Oh, great. This is more fun. Thank you. I like to wander around, make the cameraman work. Hi, Samira. How are you today? Okay, great. So, which one of you are running businesses or in businesses in the room? Some of you in the private sector, yes, I heard you talking. Okay. Who's in the media? Anyone? We have journalists? Development partners? Yes. And multilateral organizations? Government? Anyone? Oh, good. Happy to see you. Very few government people dare to come to an SME discussion, so I'm very happy to see you here. Because it takes all of you to see and understand the real heart of the SME challenge. So what we've decided for this session this morning is we are hopefully live streaming this to a lot of audiences around Africa and around the world. It will be recorded, and we will continue to launch this SME survey and the findings from this great report after the summit. Because really, the study was commissioned at the bequest of our teams, having looked at the compounded crisis, the triple crisis, over the last few years. We thought that climate change was really the main crisis, of course, and it continues to plague us. Then COVID, of course, came. No one expected the kinds of disruptions that COVID had in the market, but many pivoted quickly. Some people are still wishing that COVID was the way it was, so we wouldn't have to travel so much and work 24/7. But COVID is practically now a mainstream illness, right? We get COVID like we get the flu, and we've, just like our businesses, figured out how to go online. We've all been virtual since 2020, and we're accommodating and adjusting, both in terms of businesses and our working environment, but also even in terms of rethinking a lot of the use of technology. And then Russia-Ukraine crisis, of course, hit. Now, what's so fascinating is that we've been having the conversations about food sovereignty in Africa, right? Some of you followed the discussion across Africa during COVID, which is if you cannot move, aren't you supposed to be self-reliant in growing enough food to feed your populations? This was, of course, followed by global disruption in availability of fuel and fertilizer, right? So the fuel, fertilizer, and food crisis then became really a constraining factor for populations across the world. Now, what I found so interesting and what challenged us is to say, we know that women and youth, right, are the populations which are the most vulnerable, of course, when it comes to cash flow, when it comes to availability of resources, when it comes to voice, when it comes to advocacy. But when you look in terms of the economic analysis, SMEs are the equivalent from an economic perspective in terms of vulnerability. And we know that SMEs are friends and families' money, right? How do you start a small business? Who amongst you have funded your friends and family's small businesses? Raise your hands. Huh? All of you are struggling to support, even me, I'm raising 2 hands. I hope my sister is watching, because she would not have survived her business, just like all of your friends and family businesses, if we weren't able to support those around us, right? And so regardless of how you think about the fragility of our economies, I don't think we pay enough attention to the plight of small businesses, and particularly micro and small businesses. So this study was commissioned to really understand better, in much more granularity and detail, what's happening across the food and agricultural supply chain. You want to move the chair right now while I'm speaking. Should I sit on it while you move it? That would make it really interesting. Okay, so it's okay. I think just-in-time delivery is the name of the game, right? So what I'm talking about in the food and agricultural supply chains, as you all know, depends on the effectiveness of small businesses to have proper liquidity, to get access to commodities, to find transport efficiency at the time and place that they need it, to be interconnected digitally. And this is something which some of us who are part of larger organizations might take for granted. My computer didn't work this morning, I go find my IT guy, somebody else is helping me. But you're running a micro business, you're dependent on yourself. You have to fix everything, right? Your bank account runs out of money, you have to go find money. Your computer system dies down, you have to go find an IT expert. So that kind of fragility is underappreciated for many. We talked the other day about grit. I was talking to the Pitch AgriHack section, in the youth dome outside. Because when you're a leader of a small business, you have to be continuously fighting every day, fighting for the survival of your business, fighting to keep your costs down, fighting to have more market. And that takes tenacity, it takes energy, it takes passion. And so we want to have the data and analytics to really support the underlying needs of the SMEs across the supply chain. So we focused on 3 countries as representatives of the African continent. We decided to pick one from Eastern Africa, which is Tanzania, fortunately. Or did we plan it? I would think we were so intelligent, Mumbi Maina, to basically know in advance that we had to look at Tanzania. Then, of course, for West Africa, we looked at Nigeria. Now, si vous étiez francophone comme moi et vous étiez longtemps en Afrique de l'Ouest, vous auriez dit que le Nigeria, c'est pas l'Afrique de l'Ouest. But it is important to consider all of West Africa. And we couldn't, of course, be in every country, is what I'm saying. So while we should have taken a few more West African countries, which are not the size of Nigeria, we also couldn't ignore Nigeria. So we studied Nigerian SMEs. And then, of course, the third country we focused on is a representative of Southern Africa. In this case, we did a deep dive in Zambia. Now, in an incredibly rapid fashion, the teams were able to survey 1,600 SMEs. And so we partnered with Ipsos. 1,600 SMEs, I think, is a fairly good number. If you get under 1,000, the data scientists will tell us it's not representative. But we just made it across the line with 1,600. And so I think from a data science perspective, we've made the cut, don't you think? So I would like to appreciate and congratulate the effort of all the partners who worked with us on these surveys. When I say we at AGRA, we work through partnerships. And I don't think people really appreciate what I mean when I say we work through partnerships, right? Does that make sense to everybody? I mean, William has known me for a long time. And William Makanwumi is an old friend we've worked with in West Africa across many, many different projects. But when I say we work through partnerships, I really mean that. Nobody knows in this room as well as Mumbi. When you say you're going to partner with me, it means you have work to do. You don't just get to sign a piece of paper and then walk away, isn't it? You have work to do. So we've been working with AFEX, we work with East Africa Farmers Federation, we work with PAFO. What I mean by that is that we build ecosystems of partners, and those ecosystems give us real reach to get to the last mile working with small businesses. That's what Generation Africa has been about. That's what Value for Her is about. Do you know Value for Her? Everybody in this room? No? Are you online on Value for Her? It's a platform for women-led entrepreneurs. That platform hosts today almost 4,000 women entrepreneurs. So if you're not on it, you go Google it and sign up today. Because those networks are about strengthening SMEs. That's the way. If you're working alone, if you're struggling, for example, on a policy issue, on an import barrier, on an export ban, you heard a rumor that you could get a tax exemption that you didn't get, how do you get that information if you're just a single small business, for example, in Mbeya or Ringa? You have to struggle to get that information. So those networks are how SMEs actually are strengthened. It's something which hopefully will come out of the final findings of this survey. The pivots that individual businesses can make, how did they learn to do those pivots? Where did they find that information, right? Most of you get on the phone, SMS, call somebody, you know somebody who knows somebody and says, how do I make this? How do I recover? How do I get this fuel when I can't find fuel? Who can fix my generator to do my processing, right? How do I get a truck to come pick up my commodities? All of those things are being done for small businesses in a manual one-off as needed basis. And that's what we want to recover. We call that informality. That's unfair. Informality implies that you're not doing something which is incredibly critical to the economic value of each country. So if you look at the data and analytics, even in large economies like the US, nothing happens without small businesses, right? And that's no different in Africa. So today, let's dig in deep. Let's get the data that supports the underlying value and strength and fragility of these small businesses and see how we can align and get the government policies, the support we need of the development partners, and really lean into small businesses as a vector of growth, as a vector of change, as a vector of resilience, and as a vector of job creation. Thank you so much. My appreciation to all of you for joining us. Anyone who's online, I hope you're waving online, standing up, showing us your grit and your strength. And now I'll turn the presentation over to the team. And we hope to distribute it as well. If you haven't shared your cards, we'll send out the report just following this session. Thank you very much.
I don't think those round of applause are enough for a well-thought-through opening. Can we give Vanessa a well-deserved round of applause? Thank you so much. There's one rule to this presentation. Don't sit on the back when we have enough seats here on front. So I would really appreciate those coming in so that we are closer to each other and we give each other the support needed in the triple crisis as our recovery. So I now welcome Samuel Mudoka, who is the Director of Public Affairs, the Center of Evaluations, managing the Horn of Africa, to take us through the findings. Karibu.
Thank you very much, Doreen. And Vanessa, it was a pleasure to follow your introduction, and you have aptly captured the essence of this piece of work and why it is very, very important. And just before I start, I would really like to recognize very important persons who were very critical and instrumental in having this piece of work running. Of course, we have Mombi, who was our pivot for the whole piece of work, and we send a lot of appreciations to her and the other AGRA team members. And on the research side, we worked closely, of course, with NERAS and with the East Africa Market Development Associates. And my very critical researchers are in the room. We have Nelin Jovu, who has joined us today, and of course, Doreen. So it's a pleasure, and thank you very much for your inputs into this piece of work. This analysis that I'm going to share with you is highly summarized. You can imagine from 1,600 SMEs and periods covering from all the way from 2020, 2021, 2022, and even 2023, looking at the impacts of what has happened during that period of time. We could only summarize the work highly so that we can bring up some presentation for around 15 to 20 minutes. And that's what I'll be doing. So I'll just pick up the main things. Everything that you see, there's a long list that is behind the scene. And once you get the presentation, I encourage you to click on it so that you see the hidden data that is behind there. Now, let me warn you that I'll be showing a lot of numbers. But because I'm a data scientist, I hope to break these numbers so that it becomes easier for all of us to appreciate and understand. What are the objectives of this piece of work? Of course, we set out to assess the impact of the triple crisis on the performance of SMEs in Africa, in those countries that Vanessa mentioned very clearly. But then secondly, we wanted to evaluate the impact and effectiveness of the response actions that the SMEs have themselves taken. And also, besides the SMEs, there are other critical actors like governments. And then from them, we wanted to develop recommendations. What is their wish list? What do they wish that governments would do, and development partners, so that their priorities can be supported as needed? The design of this study was multi-method. We went out and selected specific value chains, specifically maize, rice, and soybeans, and especially in Zambia, and also tomatoes to represent the horticulture sector. And you can clearly see the regions where we did this, a sample study, the regions where we sampled this from. We also have had key informant interviews with very critical players, covering both traders and processors and other important persons in that value chain. And we have done literature review on all available literature that we could get that is talking about the triple action. And like Vanessa said, this was done pretty fast. The last 14 days, some of us have not known any sleep just to make this happen. And we covered that sample size across the three countries, 1,600. So specifically, why did we want to understand this from traders? A lot of the actions that have gone into empowerment, and especially from some perspective of programming, and especially in Agra, have gone towards farmers, empowering the farmers themselves. But traders also play a very critical role, because traders usually buy from those farmers. And we have also understood and found out that traders support farmers with information. So most of the farmers, the only information point they get is from traders, but they also keep record for farmers. And that sounds very interesting. You find that the trader has much more information on what the farmer is actually doing. And that is in terms of getting information and putting it for the farmers. But we also discovered that traders actually finance farmers. So this is a very important segment, and anything that would affect traders has an impact also on the farmers. And because all of us are driving the empowerment of farmers, it is important to carry along the traders in that journey. So let me go to the summary of the key findings. What did we find out? On the first objective of assessing the impact of the triple crisis on the performance of SMEs. First, we've tried to look at the periods and the specific impacts, and we see that in Nigeria, actually COVID came for a very short period of time and life moved on, same as in Tanzania. In Zambia, we've been informed by an expert that on paper the period was very long, but seems things just calmed out quickly. You see the impacts of the war in Ukraine, for the length of time it has been felt. But also climate change has also been an issue. We see Nigeria has experienced floods, and especially in 2022, we have had droughts in Tanzania across almost the whole period, and also in Zambia. So the triple actions have actually played out in those markets and have affected the traders, and we expect the sort also have affected farmers of the same period of time. So when we ask farmers whether their revenues have been affected over the whole period of time, when you look across those periods from 2019 to 2020, 2020, 2021, across year on year, we found out that actually over half of the farmers, just around half of the farmers in Nigeria, for instance, said that they reported lower revenues than the previous year in 2019. But that percentage, the green percentage, is declining. The big interpretation we could make to this is that the impact was very big at the beginning, but then it has continued to ease out, and especially for Nigeria. In Tanzania, 82% of the farmers in 2019-2020 reported that their revenues were lower. And you see significantly high amounts of traders in Tanzania have also reported the same across the other periods. Zambia started out, the impact was big, it eased out a bit, but then we see a much bigger struggle even into this year, that traders are looking at their revenues and they'll be lower than even last year. And then when you look at those traders who say that they have had lower revenues, majority of them actually across those years are saying that the decline was severe. It is more than 20%. And when you ask them whether they have recovered or the percentage that have recovered, it is very small. So just very few traders actually seem to have recovered or are showing a level of recovery. So the declines were there, they were severe, and only a small proportion of traders have recovered over that period of time. When you look specifically at the value chains, in Nigeria, maize was hardest hit in 2020, and medium-sized businesses were also hardest hit. But we've seen the recovery has been much better or faster for medium-sized businesses than small businesses. So small businesses are still struggling. In Tanzania, again, maize was hardest hit, and the struggle has continued. Maize farmers, traders who deal with maize are still struggling to recover compared to other value chains. And in Tanzania, all SMEs seem to have been affected in almost a similar manner across the periods. In Zambia, horticulture, that is the soybeans, horticulture and soybeans were hit hardest. But the horticulture sector started recovering. They started recovering, and the recovery was faster. Again, medium-sized businesses were hardest hit, and especially by COVID, but they also have recovered faster. What caused the decline? At top level, it was the high price of transportation and the high price of produce for Nigeria. But Tanzania, the script changes a bit. It was low profit margins and reduced sales. Zambia and Nigeria seem to share almost a similar trade of actually what caused. But there are many, many things that caused the decline. So high price of produce, and especially in Tanzania, and reliable rainfall patterns. You see them playing big in Tanzania. And those challenges that were faced by traders and processors, when you put them in groups, you find that the cost of doing business seemed to play the biggest kind of a challenge. And also demand, all those things that are put together under demand, like difficult in finding buyers, few customers, and they were almost cutting across in the three markets. But also climate change, issues around unreliable rainfall, and especially in Tanzania and Zambia also played as big challenges affecting traders. Now, let's move on to the second objective of evaluating the impact of effectiveness of the responses to the actions those SMEs put in place. First, what mitigations did the SMEs put in place themselves? What almost seems to cut across is that they injected more capital in the business, So Nigerian traders quickly thought, where can we get more money to put into a business and survive? And then Zambia also similarly. Tanzania, I thought this was very, very interesting. Tanzanian traders, the first thing was a knee-jerk kind of a reaction immediately. We reduce on Genex and we reduce on staff costs. And probably, drop some of the products and commodities that we are selling. So different reactions across the countries. But most interesting is that a trend is similar in Nigeria and Zambia and different in Tanzania. But this is a long list of strategies that businesses themselves put in place. Did they take a loan? Now, rather of a disappointing kind of a finding that fewer businesses, actually, just in the region of about 10%, took a loan. The incidence of taking loans was slightly higher in Zambia. It seems like in Zambia, we can easily give loans. It will be interesting to find where they got those loans from. But the other markets, the incidence of traders themselves accessing credit, only few of them went out to seek for credit. And when you look at this across value chains, you see something that is very interesting. In Nigeria, not much difference across value chains, but at the beginning, in Nigeria, rice farmers quickly went up to take credit when COVID began. In Tanzania, rice and more of the medium-sized businesses went up actually to take credit. We see much more preference. In Zambia, it was more of the tomato and medium-sized businesses that went on to take credit. Where did they take this credit from? Very interesting. Nigerians from individuals and friends and family members, so rather more of informal credit, and followed by a few that went to the commercial bank. In Tanzania, across that period, we see businesses, majority of those who took loans, and remember the proportion is only the 10% of businesses who took loans went to a commercial bank. Now, this was a very interesting finding because traditionally, we believed that Tanzanians go for informal credit. We would love to know what happened in Tanzania for businesses to really go for commercial credit. And in Zambia, it's a mixed bag from microfinance institutions, from individuals and family, more of informal, but fewer actually from commercial banks. Now, one of the findings that is not here is that mobile app loans actually came out, and we noticed that more in Zambia than Nigeria and in Tanzania, which is a very interesting dynamic. What did governments do? Governments have done a lot of activities. For example, across the three countries, we saw national climate policy to address the climate change. So governments, coming up with new strategies to implement farming techniques, agroforestry, afforestation, and this almost cuts across all governments. So at least there was a change in policy. In terms of reactions or activities towards COVID, we know all those that happened, travel restrictions, tax waivers, lockdowns, and all of them are well documented. And also we are seeing quite a number of activities that governments have done since the onset of the war in Ukraine, which are basically meant to cushion traders as well. However, we find a low level of awareness for some of these initiatives. Low level of awareness. Actually, when you look at Nigeria and Zambia, majority of traders are not even aware of some of those initiatives that the government has put in place, like, moratorium credit, wage service. They're not aware about them. And when you look at the other side, very few traders think those initiatives were very effective. And perhaps this is something that we want to encourage governments, and especially those of us who are policymakers in this platform. There could be a lot that we have done, but maybe we have not talked about them loudly. Maybe we have not done a lot of activation so that traders know that these initiatives are present and they can take advantage of them. And as a result of low awareness, they also do not feel that these initiatives are actually effective in addressing the triple crisis. And finally, we look at the recommendations that these traders are giving to governments. Like, what is their wish list? From traders, provision of affordable credit to businesses comes at the top of the list. And then there is specific to Nigeria, and also I think across other markets, support trader groups. Tax exemptions also come up. In Tanzania, tax exemptions. And we've picked something across the market, that the moment we create an enabling environment, and especially for traders, they also become open to do business, and they are not scared that the government is only looking for tax or clamp down. So the moment we make it open for them to do business, then it almost becomes an incentive. But when we put a lot of those initiatives and then score them, and we see what comes at top of the list. So the fuel issue is very, very important. Reasonable fuel costs. So we need to create reasonable fuel costs, and that will really enable for Nigeria. And also currency comes out in Nigeria as well, the currency issues. As long as our currency is not as valuable as the US dollar in terms of exchange rates, then that affects traders. In Tanzania, traders are asking for market information to be availed to them, and also enabling easy registration of businesses so that businesses can access loans without fear of paying higher taxes. That's important. In Zambia, the fuel issue, but also put in place or keep in place a fertilizer subsidy for farmers. That's actually top on the wish list, against others that also come out strongly. So, what is the key takeout in this piece of work? We conclude that the triple crisis has had a severe and profound negative impact. And this has been year on year. And we think that these stresses have a compounded effect over time. So the effect has been big. COVID-19 led to revenue decline, more operating costs. These were increased more by the Ukraine invasion, and the climate change aspect is only making it worse for traders. So these challenges still exist, and traders are not out of the woods. And when you look at it from a pessimistic viewpoint, recovery is slow. And it has been elongated because many have not recovered. Many did not recover at all, even before the next crisis came in. And so we want to suppose that there is a high level of vulnerability amongst traders. And that is where we think government needs to come in to support extensively. We know they have done a lot of activities and they have reached quite a number of groups. But how big are the groups that need to be reached? We think there is a lot that needs to be done in terms of cutting fuel costs, providing fertilizer subsidy, market information, reducing on red tape and corruption, and supporting trader groups. In as much as they have been doing that, but the magnitude of that needs to be much, much felt. But also we have an optimistic viewpoint that the opportunities still exist. There are extensive opportunities amongst these businesses to grow and prosper and support farmers. These traders support farmers, so the more and more we enable them, the more and more we get the ripple effect through the farmers. And that is the most optimistic viewpoint. The moment we support businesses, they will give value to the farmers and communities. But we require investment into businesses to achieve this. And that will only lead to them working with more and more farmers, alleviating poverty, and actually increasing food security. As a critical to the pull factors for farm sales, this sector needs tailored and concerted investment to support and to help it survive, strengthen, and grow into the future. Ladies and gentlemen, I put my submissions to an end, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samuel. I know we are running out of time. I would love to welcome a panel discussion. So now the panelists, can you take your seats? We would want to unpack a little bit of what the finding means from the experience and practical experience from the field where people are working. I would request humbly those who are seated on the back to move a little bit closer. We love seeing people closer to us, and we will appreciate if they're very close to us. So with me today is very experienced team of experts in the field who have worked with SMEs and both supporting agriculture, traders, and processors. So closer to me is Samira Adebiyi from AFEX. She is she's the managing director. She serves on the company's executive team, where she plays a defining role in overseeing operate finance and strategic investment, critical to unlocking capital for producers, processors, and investors in the agri-value chain. Please, a round of applause for Samira. Together with Samira, I have Carl Jensen. So Carl Jensen is the co-founder and CEO of Good Nature Agro, a social enterprise working with smallholder farmers in Zambia. And I have with me Vic Sydney, who works for AMDT as a private sector development practitioner. She is knowledgeable on market system, thinking approach, and support development models to addressing constraint in agriculture market system. And then finally, I have Robert Samiji from the National Microfinance Bank. He is the manager agribusiness. He's worked with agribusiness for the last 10 years. Thank you, everyone. And now, I'll start with you, Carl. Working with, as a social enterprise, working with SMEs in Zambia, what strategies did you employ to ensure that the processors, the traders within the SMEs are able to navigate and survive the triple crisis?
Great, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Like most businesses, our first emphasis was on health when it came to COVID. Nobody really knew back when it began exactly what we were facing, how severe the dangers were, and the international community, the development community, stepped up big in that regard. There was a massive and rapid push to get health messaging out across Zambia, to treat COVID like a true crisis. And the health side was initially incredibly well done. But at the same time, you're facing a lot of realities when it comes to the way the economy functions, where these businesses, traders, our business, farming, cannot be conducted via Zoom. It's not possible. You cannot hustle via Zoom. And so the lockdown that on paper lasted an incredibly long time really lasted about a week. And it was ultimately the right move for the economy. I think government's role in these situations is to be a truth teller. They did a great job promoting that this was a health crisis. They put the message out, but then when reality hits, you need to be adaptive. And the effects that came after that varied widely depending on which role you play in the value chain. For a trader, you saw the reduction in income, but for a farmer, with shipping prices going through the roof and production and supply-demand curves being highly localized for a time, it was actually a period of rapidly increased incomes. Food prices went up, farmers got paid more, a lot of our growers made profits that they may not see again on a per hectare basis because it was that much of a change in the shock to the system. Briefly on Russia, Russia-Ukraine, I should keep it a little bit balanced. I feel like the worst is yet to come, and the effect there is more likely to be from the geopolitical divides that are being drawn right now, the curtain that is falling right now, that is forcing countries into one camp or the other, which I won't name, but you all know what I mean. And that's the part that really scares me and that I'm concerned about. I think South Africa is a good example. You know, they're being forced to essentially choose between allies, when at this point in time, what they need, what the economy needs, is just to be able to trade, to be able to run businesses, to be able to promote their own economy without being dragged into a conflict that doesn't directly affect their citizens. Thanks.
Thanks, Carl. I have a follow-up for you. So we are seeing that the impact of COVID, when the reality hit, the businesses had to open and operate, and we are yet to see the full impact of the Russia-Ukraine war. And climate change is a continuous challenge we face. So what are the biggest public sector related barriers that you could talk to us, that barriers to growth and investment and competitiveness of agribusiness in this kind of a context?
I think continuing the push for open trade, even amongst pressure to isolate, which comes in many forms, pressure to prioritize your own value addition, which is completely understandable. The Forex concerns that it feels like the only way that you can address them is by importing less. Sometimes that's not always the case. And I would encourage all of the governments to continue to find a balance between investing in value addition over time, but keeping trade open until that time occurs. And then finding allies on the financing side. I think it was very loud on the responsive traders that access to credit was the most important thing they can have. That may not come through the traditional banks, and that varied a lot by country, but I can tell you in Zambia, it won't. So the public side needs to be a little more creative about the forms of financial institutions that they engage, promote, and link to traders and small SMEs.
Thank you. I'll move on to Vic Sydney. You work you're a market analyst. What are the most significant ways in which business environment has changed over the last 3 years and how that has impacted the businesses in the agribusiness sector?
Okay, thank you very much, Doreen, and thank you everyone for being here this morning. I'll give a little bit of background about AMDT. It's the Agricultural Market Development Trust. We are based here in Dar es Salaam, and the organization was formed in 2014 and started its operation in 2015. It's currently working with 9 regions in Tanzania and in 2 crop sectors, that is pulses and sunflower. We are working with different partners, including the government of Tanzania, the Ministry of Agriculture. So maybe going back to the question, the significant ways which business environment has changed over the last 3 years. I'll specifically focus here in Tanzania. I would say the big thing is that since financial year 2021, the government of Tanzania has announced their single-digit interest for the agro loans. Can you hear me? Yeah, for the agro loans. So it's about 9% interest rate to encourage farmers to access different financing opportunities, but as well the traders to also access agri products from the financial institution to support them recover and maybe regenerate and get back to their feet and continue supporting the businesses. But again, I can say we had some gain intervention from the government, where the government of Tanzania decided after the Ukraine-Russia war, the decline in edible oil, then they had to provide some subsidy in providing the improved seed among smallholder farmers to boost a little bit of more production of sunflower within the country. At least we are self-sufficient in edible oil, and try to balance, as Carl said, we have to balance between the import and what we produce internally. But again, they didn't only end there. I think they also provided subsidy in the last farming season. We have seen government providing subsidy also on fertilizer. So for us, I would say it was 50% contribution from the farmer and 50% from the government. And that also supported the productivities on all crop sectors. So maybe when we do the analysis this year or the next year, we'll be able to see some of the data that Sam has presented are getting better due to these different strategies that the government is putting in place. And the government is not doing this alone. AMDT is also supporting the government to come up with innovative strategies, especially also reviewing different strategies like the edible oil strategy, the pulses strategies, to make sure that we have the longer term strategies of how do we drive businesses in agriculture. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Vic. You've talked about how the government, we had single-digit interest for agri loans. I'll move on to Robert. Working as a bank, NMB, how has the bank perspective and appetite for agriculture deals changed over the last 3 years?
I work with NMB and the agribusiness department, and as NMB Bank is known, NMB Bank covers almost all the regions to the level of districts, and some places to the level of villages, where most of these farmers are found. And our focus has been in agri-SME, especially taking up the MSME ones to the level of processing and trading. That means if we support more SME farmers, traders, they'll be able to take up what has been produced by farmers. So this has been our approach, and recent, in 3 years back, we've been supporting on value chain financing, whereby most of these SMEs have been coming for processing facilities, storage facilities. As we see during crisis, it's time that people need to store food. People need to have stocks in place that they can have equal distribution across the regions. As we know, there are areas where there is high production and areas where there is low production of food. So during the COVID-19, people were kind of locked. So those ones who could not move would need food. So we had to support the facilities, and those supported could distribute food to others who were not accessing food from the producing areas. So this was also in support of what has been put in place by the government, having collection of food through national food agents. By financing the aggregators, it was easy for the national food agents getting enough food and have reserve for the country. So with the interest rates being adjusted a bit to be at least favorable to farmers, that could make more SMEs and MSCs coming to the financial institutions and accessing credits. Thank you.
Thank you. To you, Samira, Affect Investment was created to fill a financing gap that you found in the system. Has your investment strategy changed over the last 3 years to respond to the triple crisis?
Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Let me start by saying that in FX Investment Limited, what we do, or what we want to do, is to act as the, when I say the gap between those who have the money, the investors, and those who need the money in the agri-value chain, from the smallholder farmers to the processors, the traders, and the exporters, as it were. So during this period, coincidentally, we started operations within the 2020-2021 season at the height of COVID. And that was the first time that we went into the market to try to raise funds from the capital market. And that's where we get most of our funding from. And what happened during that period was that the prices of the commodities went up. And for that, the investors got, well, much higher than the inflation rate. So it kind of gave investors the confidence to come to say, okay, look, yeah, maybe there's something in agric, based on the narrative that we had sold to them, that agric is not as risky as it is, and they were able to get high returns during that period. It made investment, getting investments from the capital market a bit easier. So obviously, down dovetailed into getting funding to all the required the value chain. So during that period, it actually served two purposes for us. It allowed us give access to finance into the value chain, and it gave investors an alternate source of investment. And something else that happened during the COVID period was, just like you alluded to, the farmers produced. They had a lot of products, and it would have been foolhardy for them to have sold at that period, because obviously they would have been selling to at a very low price. But because one of the things we do in FX is provide warehouses, and the warehouses are close to where the primary production is, the farmers were able to store their commodities and sell when prices were at the highest. So that was a win-win for them. And for the traders, they had a stock of commodities to buy and give to their off-takers. So that period was a good one for us and for farmers or traders or processors who worked through us. So it has given confidence to them to come back to us. And obviously, most of our business is word of mouth as it comes to financing. So if a trader or processor or farmer goes to a company who is able to give them financing, obviously word of mouth, and so it has helped us to increase our scope of business and to the players that work with us. So, yeah. Okay. Oh, she did introduce me. Oh, she did introduce me. So my name is Samira Adeadebi. I work for FX Investment Limited, one of the companies in the FX Commodities Exchange. We work out of Nigeria, Kenya, and Uganda. Not at the moment. Yes.
Thank you. I didn't know that you had missed that. Okay, so in every crisis, there's opportunities. I'm hearing opportunities that came with the crisis. I'll go back to NMB, to Robert. We have noticed that in Tanzania, higher average of SMEs took loans from the commercial banks as their financial partners during this crisis. What are the drivers of this, and why do you think the appetite has increased in the last 2 years from taking loan from families and now moving more to commercial banks?
Yeah, thank you. As earlier explained, and from the last speaker explained about storage facilities, having logistics around agri-value chains. The key drivers has been we need to have food aggregated, and if we need to have food aggregated, we need to have logistics around. So most of SME and the SME guys have been coming for those kind of facilities to make sure that they have structures fit for the formalized market. And for Tanzanian case, if you've seen of recent, we have formalized most of the commodities, like selling in aggregation form and warehouse receipt systems or collateral management arrangement where stocks can be used as collaterals for those ones who do not have tangible or physical collaterals. So the formalized market has been pushing for more capital going to this SME that they can have crops aggregated and sold under the formal markets. So as we have seen of recent, because of these traders financing farmers, so for us, focusing on these traders in giving them financial facilities makes the same going down to farmers that we cannot reach at one time. So these factors have been triggering giving out more financial assistance to traders and SME, because we know having that group, we can reach out to many farmers at once.
Thank you. We have at least 10 minutes for questions. Okay, Samuel, can you help me? Okay, someone is here to help. There's a hand here. Okay.
I am from NME Bank. NME Bank, Agribusiness Department. Okay, you have.
Sure, certainly. Okay, questions? There are hands.
Thank you very much. Mine is a quick question. I'm Daniel Ojambo from the Private Sector Foundation in Uganda. I just wanted to hint on your discussion around the government of Tanzania having offered subsidies to the farmers when we had a triple crisis, obviously, in sorts. I was imagining, so my question is around the effect of these subsidies in the long run. A report just came out from the Netherlands, and I hope you might want to access it, that some of these subsidies are actually accelerating effects of climate change, environmental issues, and so forth. So I just wanted to appreciate from your end whether you've taken some bit of consideration when it comes into the subsidies that are coming through, at least from the Tanzanian government, especially when the crises come through. Thank you.
Vicky, do you have any insight on that one?
Let me try to internalize if I really got what he was asking about. You are asking if the subsidy has impact on the environment, right? Okay, so the subsidy that government provided, especially for the improved seed for sunflower to increase sunflower grains production, I would say it considered elements of environment, because they provided the short-term and drought-tolerant seeds, and as well the fertilizers that has been supplied for the last ending agricultural season also had an element of considering the environmental friendly aspect part. And as well, the subsidy does not just go down to the farmers without some sort of an extension services to support on how can they best use the climate smart practices to ensure that they boost the productivities. Because if you have the improved seeds or you have the fertilizer alone without applying some other complementing climate smart agricultural practices, you won't be able to really get the productivities that is expected out of the subsidy. And again, the subsidy was provided in a way that it will also include the private sector to engage within the businesses. So it's not like the government itself pushing it, but some of the commercial aspect was also taken on board to ensure that after the intervention, because the subsidy was only to intervene during this crisis, but it doesn't mean like it will be a forever handover to farmers and create this dependence of waiting for other subsidy to come in. That's where now the role of AMDT and other practitioners comes in to also support the government to understand how do we go with this intervention to solve this problem, but yet continue thinking on sustainable means for approaching these crises in the future. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. There are more hands.
Thanks very much. No? There we go. Thank you very much. Microphone number 2. Cool. Thanks very much. My name is Drew Whedon from Tetra Tech. I have two very closely related questions, and they could be for the original report author, or I'd also love to hear from the panelists just in terms of their own experience. So I thought that the slide and the information about the coping mechanisms, the sort of response mechanisms that different organizations had was fascinating and dovetails off of some work that we did in the past as well. I was wondering if you have any, it'd be hard to have it with kind of a post hoc survey, but if you have any maybe anecdotal information about the number of firms in this space who closed up shop entirely or moved to a completely different kind of hustle and just exited this work stream entirely. And again, it'd be hard to get that years later, but I'm just curious if you heard about that through your surveying or if the panel has experience with that in their areas. And then the second related question is around the perception of risk and sort of how people are thinking about managing their risk, especially with relation to the conflict and climate change in the medium and long term, which are going to, as the panelists said, continue to have kind of ongoing and perhaps even higher or greater impact. So I'd love to hear about if there's any change in that perception of risk and how SMEs are managing against that. Thanks.
So allow me to take the first question. Our study, we only focused on businesses that have survived. We talked to businesses that were there in 2020 and that have survived up to this period of time. However, we've done a comprehensive desk research, and there's documented evidence of significant numbers of businesses that closed shop as a result of COVID and quite a number of others, the impact. So in our final release, the study that we're releasing will give the specific number of documented businesses that closed shop as a result of the triple effects. Thank you very much.
So if I could just add to that. In my country, Nigeria, there's this particular SME that we're working with. She's both a farmer and she's done some backward integration. Okay, so she's a processor, and she used to buy her commodity, what she used, her raw material from the market. And during that period, because she couldn't get it, so she decided to do backward integration on the one hand, so she could control, the quantity and the quality of what she receives. And on the other hand, because most of the commodities are seasonal. So what she had done, without giving out too much information on the particular, so during the period, her core business, for the farmers that she was working with, during the period of the core business, she would get her products. Then the off season, she did now went into a new product that could fill the gap between the required commodities that she needed, the time she needed it, and the next season. So she filled the gap, and so she was able to, in two ways, to increase the quantity and quality of her core product, and also get more income from a different kind of product. So she was working through, and this only came about because obviously because of the shortfall and the difficulties that she had faced during that period. And we see more and more people doing that, going into commodities that would, keep them active through the entire seasons.
Carol, do you have any insight on the second one, on the prolonged impact that we see that this is not ending anytime soon? But what mechanism or strategies have people adapted to put in place to absorb the shocks that might come?
Yeah, I think trading's an easy business to enter and exit, as you said, and that's a good thing. Being nimble in these times is really important. I would add on to that by, and on a related note, saying diversification, in a word. Finding ways to diversify your business, spread out that cash flow more evenly when that financing is not available, and then leveraging data. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but leveraging data to, where possible, to have those medium-sized SMEs take up a bigger role in financing of smaller companies, entrepreneurs, those who are doing the work closest to farmers, closest to the need.
Thank you. There's
Yes, thank you. My name is Neva Zekea. I'm a researcher and entrepreneur and innovator of biopesticides. Thanks for your report. From your report, the triple crisis and low productivity, you have not mentioned about pest. Food production in Africa is affected by pest. When you talk about maize, fall armyworm is a very striking problem all over the Africa. Again, on tomato, tooth absolute is the main problem that cause low productivity. You have also concluded that you need to subsidize in fertilizer. The problem is not fertilizer. The one that is really affecting food production recently in Africa are these two main pests that are invasive. So even from the panel discussion, you have mentioned that there is subsidies in fertilizer and seeds. Even if we'll do that, if we do not address the real problem, we will not reach that food production and sustainable food production in Africa. So I would like to hear from this discussion, how are we subsidizing pesticide? For instance, here we have a biopesticide that I have invented myself. We are from Tanzania. Is for control fall armyworm on maize and tuta absoluta on tomato. So these are the ones that cause up to 100 loss in pre-harvest. Even during COVID-19, farmers couldn't afford to buy pesticides, so it could be there could be effort to subsidize so that they could purchase and also control this pest. So in this discussion, if we ignore pest invasion, we will not reach what we are discussing. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone who has any further comment on pests? We've talked about fertilizer and seeds. How do we manage pests?
Yeah, I would say like she provided a contribution of what should we continue covering, but given the time that we had for this discussion, I would say like we wouldn't go exhaustively and start discussing each strategy that the country has taken into place to make sure that farmers and traders are able to continue the productivity. But if we have another forum or we can take it bilateral, discuss more further on integrated pest management and those kind of stuff that we are also training farmers to undertake in their own context to ensure that they are also managing the pests, because it's a reality that we can't really run away from, especially in the space of climate change. Climate change has brought so many things. One of it is also pest. Yeah.
Sorry, if I may. One of the things that we do in FX is that we fund farmers. And we don't fund farmers, we don't give them cash. What we give them are bundles. So we give them, we buy the fertilizer for them, we buy the pesticides, and we provide the seeds. So we take all this into consideration in advancing the funding to them, or the financing to them. And aside that, once the loan is given, we also go a step further to ensure that it is used, not just used, but used correctly and timely. So we take all this into consideration when we're doing the funding, because there's no point giving them the fertilizer only and not giving them a bundle that will ensure that there will be adequate production of and good yield at the end of the period.
Just one last question, and then.
Okay, my name is William Akiumi. I'm the Senior Agriculture Advisor for the Africa Bureau, USAID, Washington. Access to finance always rises to the top when we have these conversations, because agriculture is a very high-risk business, and that is one of the reasons, or one of the key reasons, why cost of finance is so high. So to the financial experts here, I mean, what are your banks doing to expand access to finance in the areas where you work, so that you can influence the amount of food purchases that the traders procure to be able to help farmers? So just a quick response would be great. Thank you.
I'm not a bank, but I'm a lender. And I think we're in a beautiful situation, in a beautiful position, because we understand farming. We understand the world of finance, and we know that farmers, most especially, or even the traders or the SMEs, do not have collateral, which is what most banks would ask for. So what we do to ensure that they have that access is to take the collateral in form of the commodity that they work with. So that's what we take for them. So that way we have more people coming to us, because I'm not going to ask you for legal mortgage or to get me some other shares or something that would collateralize your funding. I'm sorry, collateralize the loan that you're taking from us. So that way we've grown our database in just 3 years of establishment. That's of the FX Investment Limited. And like I said earlier on, it's word of mouth. So if this SME knows that, look, you're coming to me and I'm not going to ask you for legal mortgage, and my rates are, well, a bit lower than the banks, just a tiny bit lower, then it just draws them to us. And I sit here proudly saying that for everyone who came in the first year, not only have they come back to us, they've also increased the amount that they're taking from us, and they have brought other people to us. And our default rate is less than 0.1%.
I know there's more hands. Okay, Robert, just 1 minute.
Yeah, just 1 minute. The hardest part in financing agri is the production, primary production part. I think, as mentioned, what we normally do is we have a foundation that goes down to teach these farmers on good practices. And because we know these farmers are the ones feeding the SMEs, and in terms of fertilizers and pesticides, that is well covered in our trainings, and we have people going down there. But also we finance the primary production part by involving other stakeholders, especially those ones who provide like guarantees, and those ones who can provide best seeds and best fertilizers. We have stakeholders connected together in reaching out these farmers. So in a bit of that, we have risks a bit shared with different stakeholders.
Just briefly, in 30 seconds, I would add that financing smallholders, when done well, in my view, is built of multiple financing vehicles. So input financing is the most obvious and the most used. We also utilize lines of credit that are available during the lean season before the crops are mature and before farmers are paid, so that anyone who gets in that position doesn't then take on a predatory loan and get stuck and get into that continuous cycle. And then asset financing as another tool. When you really get to know those farmers, you can then add on this next step and help them progress.
Allow me to close this formal conversation, but the conversation will keep going. We've run out of time. We know we started a little bit late because there was another session that most people were in. We are just closing the main conversation here, but let's keep the conversation going because of the importance of the data and the traders and SMEs within ensuring food security and in the agribusiness. Thanks everyone for being here and for your patience and also for your valuable contribution. A round of applause to my panelists. Thank you so much.